The old historian nearly dropped his books when he saw the pendant around her neck. The moment lasted less than a second, but it was enough to change the course of an entire kingdom. Olivia Carter did not notice the reaction. She was too busy pulling her travel bag through the crowded streets of Silvercrest, the capital city she had dreamed about visiting for years. The city stretched across rolling hills beneath the shadow of the royal palace. White stone buildings reflected the afternoon sunlight. Merchants called to passing customers. Children chased one another through market squares. Musicians played near fountains decorated with carved wolves and ancient kings. To everyone around her, Olivia looked like an ordinary young woman searching for a fresh start. No one could have guessed that history itself had been waiting for her return. She paused near the central square and looked up toward the palace resting high above the city. Something about it felt strangely familiar. The sensation made no sense. She had never been there before, yet the sight stirred emotions she could not explain. For a moment, she felt as though she had seen those towers somewhere long ago, perhaps in a forgotten dream. Olivia shook the thought away and continued walking. Her goal was simple. She had recently been offered temporary work assisting at the Royal Archives, a position she had accepted immediately. Books had always been her refuge. History fascinated her. While other people spent evenings attending social gatherings, Olivia preferred reading old records and forgotten stories. The opportunity felt almost too good to be true. As she crossed the square, a sudden gust of wind lifted a strand of her blonde hair and exposed the silver pendant resting beneath her collar. An elderly man sitting near a fountain froze. His eyes widened. For several seconds he stared directly at the necklace. The books balanced on his lap slipped slightly as his hands trembled. Olivia remained unaware. She simply adjusted her travel bag and disappeared into the crowd. The old man stood slowly. Professor Theodore Langley had spent more than 40 years studying the kingdom's lost histories. He knew ancient symbols better than most people knew their own family names. And the symbol engraved upon that pendant should not have existed. Not anymore. It had vanished from official records over 20 years earlier. Langley took a step forward as if to follow her, then stopped. Perhaps he was mistaken. Age could play tricks on memory. Yet doubt continued to grow inside him. Across the city, high within the palace, Alpha King Ethan Blackwell stood before a wall of windows overlooking the capital. Advisors discussed trade agreements behind him, but Ethan's attention drifted elsewhere. The responsibilities of ruling consumed most of his days. Every decision carried consequences. Every meeting demanded patience. Lately, he found himself longing for something unexpected. Not excitement. Not power. Answers. The kingdom's history contained gaps that had never fully made sense to him. Missing records. Contradictory accounts. Stories that ended too abruptly. Though he did not know it yet, the answers he sought had just entered his city carrying a worn travel bag and a silver pendant. As evening settled over Silvercrest, Olivia finally reached the Royal Archives. The enormous building stood beside the palace grounds, illuminated by golden lanterns. She paused at the entrance and smiled. It felt like the beginning of a new chapter. Far above her, hidden within forgotten shelves and sealed records, the first clues to her true identity had been waiting for decades. And tonight, without realizing it, she had already awakened them. The following morning, Olivia arrived at the Royal Archives before most of the staff. A thin layer of mist still lingered over the palace grounds, softening the outlines of the massive stone buildings that surrounded her. She climbed the wide front steps and paused for a moment to admire the structure. The archives were older than many parts of the capital itself. Towering windows stretched toward the sky. Intricate carvings decorated the walls. Hundreds of years of history rested behind those doors. The sight filled her with excitement. A clerk greeted her at the entrance and handed her a temporary identification badge. "Welcome to the archives," the woman said politely. "You will be assisting with cataloging records and organizing historical collections." Olivia smiled. "Thank you. I am happy to be here." The clerk led her through long corridors lined with shelves that seemed endless. Ancient books filled every available space. Scrolls rested inside glass cases. Portraits of kings, queens, scholars, and military leaders watched silently from the walls. Olivia felt as though she had stepped into the heart of the kingdom's memory. Throughout the morning, she worked alongside several archivists. Most were friendly enough, though a few viewed her as an outsider. Temporary assistants came and went regularly. Few remained long enough to earn trust. Olivia understood their caution. She simply focused on doing her work well. As the hours passed, she surprised several staff members with her knowledge. While organizing records from 3 decades earlier, she corrected an incorrectly dated entry. Later, she identified a misplaced historical reference that had confused another assistant. The archivists exchanged curious glances. "How did you know that?" one of them asked. Olivia looked slightly embarrassed. "I read a lot." The answer seemed simple, but it did not fully explain what people were noticing. There were moments when she recognized details that should have been obscure. Names, symbols, events buried deep within forgotten texts. Even Olivia could not explain why certain things felt familiar. During lunch, she wandered into a quiet reading room rarely used by visitors. Sunlight poured through tall windows, illuminating floating dust particles in the air. Rows of books surrounded her. The peaceful atmosphere felt strangely comforting. As she explored the room, her eyes settled on a large painting hanging above a fireplace. It depicted the royal family from many years ago. Olivia stopped walking. Something about the image captured her attention immediately. She found herself staring at the painted palace in the background. The gardens, the stone paths, the arrangement of the towers. A sudden feeling washed over her. Recognition. Not complete recognition, but enough to make her uneasy. She stepped closer. "Have we met before?" she whispered to herself, almost laughing at the absurd thought. Paintings could not answer questions, yet the strange familiarity remained. Meanwhile, on the opposite side of the palace grounds, Professor Theodore Langley sat alone inside a private office. Spread across his desk were dozens of historical references, sketches, family crests, genealogical records. Every few minutes his gaze returned to a rough drawing he had made from memory. It was the symbol he had seen on Olivia's pendant. The more he searched, the more unsettled he became. According to official history, the crest should have disappeared more than 20 years ago, yet he knew exactly where it belonged. The problem was that the family connected to that symbol no longer existed. Or at least that was what the kingdom believed. As evening approached, Olivia completed her first day and prepared to leave. She stepped outside the archives carrying a small stack of borrowed books. High above her, inside the palace, Alpha King Ethan Blackwell stood at a window overlooking the grounds. His eyes drifted toward the archive building below. Neither of them noticed the other. Yet fate had already begun drawing their paths together. While deep within the archives, an old sealed storage room waited quietly behind a locked door that had not been opened in more than 20 years. 2 days later, Olivia had already become one of the most talked-about assistants inside the royal archives. Not because she sought attention. Quite the opposite. She worked quietly, asked thoughtful questions, and spent every spare moment reading. Yet the more time she spent among the records, the more unusual things began to happen. It started with a simple cataloging assignment. Olivia had been asked to organize a collection of damaged historical indexes that most employees avoided because of their complexity. The shelves contained thousands of references dating back decades. Many entries were incomplete. Others had been copied incorrectly over the years. While reviewing one of the ledgers, Olivia paused. Something felt wrong. She compared 2 pages, then a third. After several minutes, she approached a senior archivist. "I think these records belong to the wrong collection." The woman looked surprised. "Why?" Olivia pointed to several names and dates. "The numbering system does not match. These entries should be grouped with royal administrative records, not trade documents." The archivist examined the pages. Slowly, her expression changed. Olivia was correct. Once again, similar moments occurred throughout the day. Olivia noticed inconsistencies others missed. She remembered obscure historical references without needing to search for them. At times, she even seemed to anticipate where misplaced records should be located. By afternoon, several archivists were openly curious about her background. Olivia had no explanation. She simply followed instincts that felt natural. Meanwhile, Professor Theodore Langley continued his own investigation. His office had become crowded with maps, notes, sketches, and family registries. Every available surface was covered with research materials. The symbol on Olivia's pendant refused to leave his thoughts. That morning, he finally located a reference hidden inside a restricted historical volume. The book had not been checked out in nearly 15 years. Langley carefully opened the fragile pages. There it was. The crest. Smaller than he remembered, but unmistakable. His hands tightened around the book. The symbol belonged to House Ashbourne, one of the oldest royal bloodlines in the kingdom's history. According to official records, the family line had disappeared more than 20 years earlier following a tragic sequence of events that historians rarely discussed. Yet the pendant around Olivia's neck carried the exact same crest. Langley stared at the page for a long time. Then he made a decision. He needed to see the pendant again. That evening, Olivia remained in the archives after most employees had left. The building grew quieter with every passing hour. Sunlight faded beyond the windows. Lanterns illuminated long corridors between towering shelves. She found herself drawn once again toward the old reading room where she had stopped earlier in the week. The large painting above the fireplace still hung there. Olivia approached it slowly. This time she noticed something new. A small crest carved into the corner of the frame. Her breath caught. The symbol looked familiar. Very familiar. She reached for the pendant beneath her collar and held it beside the painting. Her eyes widened. The two symbols were identical. Before she could fully process what she was seeing, a voice spoke behind her. "I was afraid of that." Olivia turned quickly. Professor Langley stood near the doorway. His expression was serious, but not unkind. For several moments, neither spoke. Then the elderly historian looked at the pendant and quietly asked the question that would begin unraveling everything. "Olivia, where did you get that necklace?" Olivia lowered her eyes toward the pendant resting in her hand. For a moment, she simply stared at it. The silver surface reflected the warm glow of the reading room lanterns. She had worn the necklace for as long as she could remember. It was as familiar to her as her own reflection. Yet suddenly it felt different. Heavier. More important. "My grandmother gave it to me," she finally answered. Professor Langley stepped closer. His attention never left the symbol engraved on the pendant. "Did she ever tell you where it came from?" Olivia shook her head. "She only said it belonged to my family." The historian remained silent for several seconds. Then he looked toward the painting above the fireplace. That symbol once belonged to one of the most influential royal families in the kingdom. Olivia followed his gaze. Her confusion deepened. Royal family? Langley nodded slowly. House Ashbourne. The name meant nothing to her. She had spent years reading history books, yet she could not immediately remember seeing it. That alone surprised her. The professor seemed to notice. Most people do not remember the name because it was gradually removed from public discussion. He paused. Officially, the family line ended more than 20 years ago. Olivia looked back at the pendant. Then why is the symbol here? That is exactly what I intend to discover. The following morning, Langley requested access to several restricted archive collections. The process normally required weeks of approval. Yet his reputation within the archives carried considerable weight. By midday, he had assembled a small research team. Together, they began searching through records that had not been examined in decades. Olivia attempted to focus on her regular work, but curiosity made concentration difficult. Every few hours, she found herself glancing toward the historian's office. The mystery surrounding the pendant refused to leave her thoughts. Late in the afternoon, a young archivist rushed into the reading hall carrying a stack of dusty folders. "Professor Langley found something," she whispered excitedly. Within minutes, several researchers gathered around a large table. Olivia remained near the back of the room, uncertain whether she should be there at all. Langley carefully unfolded a faded document recovered from a forgotten storage collection. The paper was fragile with age. Several sections had been damaged, yet enough remained readable. The room fell silent as he began reviewing the contents. His expression changed immediately. Surprise gave way to concentration. Then concentration became disbelief. "This cannot be right," one archivist murmured. Langley continued reading. "It is right." He turned another page. More names appeared. Dates, family connections, references to official events that had never appeared in modern histories. The professor looked up. Someone altered the public record. Nobody spoke. The possibility was almost unthinkable. Historical records were supposed to preserve truth. Yet the evidence sitting before them suggested entire chapters had been hidden. Olivia felt an unexpected chill. She did not fully understand why, but every new discovery seemed to pull her closer to the center of the mystery. As evening approached, Langley locked the recovered documents inside a secure archive cabinet. Before leaving, he paused beside Olivia. I need more time, he said quietly. But I believe your pendant is connected to something far larger than either of us imagined. Olivia managed a small nod. Outside, darkness settled across the capital. High above the city, lights glowed from the palace windows. Inside one of those offices, Alpha King Ethan Blackwell was reviewing reports when a brief message from the Royal Archives arrived on his desk. It contained only a few lines, but they were enough to capture his full attention. A previously hidden royal bloodline may still exist. Ethan read the message twice. Then he slowly looked toward the archives beyond the palace grounds, unaware that the young woman at the center of the investigation was already beginning to change the course of his kingdom. The message from the Royal Archives remained on Ethan Blackwell's desk long after his advisors had left for the evening. The palace office was quiet except for the faint crackling of a fireplace and the distant sounds of the city settling into the night. Ethan leaned back in his chair and read the report again. A previously hidden royal bloodline may still exist. The sentence seemed simple enough, yet it carried enormous implications. For generations, historians had believed certain chapters of the kingdom's past were settled. Now evidence suggested otherwise. Ethan had spent much of his life studying the history of the realm he ruled. He knew that missing records often concealed important truths. What concerned him most was not the possibility of a forgotten bloodline. It was the fact that someone had gone to great lengths to erase it. The following morning, Ethan arrived at the Royal Archives without public announcement. Only 2 trusted guards accompanied him. He preferred discretion. Rumors spread quickly through the capital, and the investigation was not ready for public attention. As he entered the archives, staff members immediately straightened in surprise. Professor Langley met him near the main reading hall and guided him toward a private research room. Stacks of documents covered nearly every available surface. Maps, genealogies, and recovered records filled tables and shelves. Ethan studied the materials in silence. "Tell me everything," he said. Langley nodded. For nearly an hour, the historian explained the discoveries. The pendant, the forgotten crest, the altered records, the recovered documents suggesting that portions of the kingdom's official history had been deliberately rewritten. Ethan listened carefully. The more he heard, the more troubled he became. "And the young woman?" he finally asked. Langley hesitated. "I do not know exactly who she is." He paused. "But I believe she is connected to all of this." Ethan glanced toward the doorway. "Where is she now?" As though fate had been waiting for the question, Olivia appeared at that exact moment carrying several ledgers. She stopped immediately upon seeing the king. Surprise flashed across her face. Then she quickly lowered her gaze and offered a respectful greeting. Ethan studied her quietly. She looked nothing like the ambitious pretenders who occasionally appeared claiming noble ancestry. There was no arrogance, no expectation, only confusion and curiosity. "You are Olivia Carter?" he asked. "Yes, Your Majesty." Her voice remained calm despite her obvious nervousness. Ethan noticed the pendant resting beneath her collar. For the briefest moment, he thought he recognized the symbol. Not from recent history, from something much older. "Professor Langley speaks highly of your work," he said. Olivia looked genuinely surprised. "That is kind of him." The conversation lasted only a few minutes, yet Ethan left with an unexpected impression. The mystery surrounding Olivia was important. But what stood out most was her character. She answered every question honestly. She never exaggerated what she knew. In fact, she openly admitted how little she understood about the growing investigation. After Ethan departed, Langley returned to his research with renewed determination. Late that afternoon, another discovery emerged from a collection of sealed archive boxes. Hidden among dozens of administrative records was a registry containing names that had been intentionally removed from later copies. The moment Langley opened it, his hands trembled. Several entries referenced House Ashbourne directly. More importantly, one page described a child placed under protected guardianship shortly after the family's disappearance. The document itself was damaged, and much of the text remained unreadable. Yet one detail survived clearly. The child had been a daughter, and according to the surviving notes, she had been hidden so carefully that even the people protecting her were instructed never to reveal the truth. As evening shadows stretched across the archives, Langley stared at the fragile page and realized the investigation had entered an entirely new stage. The mystery was no longer whether a forgotten bloodline existed. The mystery was whether Olivia herself was the missing heir everyone had believed was lost forever. The discovery of the damaged registry changed everything. By sunrise the next morning, Professor Langley had already reviewed the surviving pages more than a dozen times. The evidence remained incomplete, but a pattern was beginning to emerge. A hidden daughter, a protected guardianship, records deliberately removed from official history. None of it proved Olivia's identity. Not yet. Yet each new document seemed to point in the same direction. Word of the investigation had remained secret for weeks, but secrets rarely stayed hidden forever. By mid-morning, rumors had begun spreading through the palace. Advisors whispered in corridors. Archivists exchanged cautious glances. Several noble families quietly requested information from the royal archives. Most requests were denied. The investigation remained confidential under direct royal authority. Even so, curiosity continued to grow. Olivia noticed the change immediately. People looked at her differently. Conversations stopped when she entered a room. Some employees became unusually polite. Others seemed skeptical. She hated the attention. The archives had always felt peaceful. Now every hallway seemed filled with questions she could not answer. That afternoon, she found Professor Langley alone inside a research chamber. Documents covered the large table before him. "Is it true?" she asked quietly. The historian looked up. "Which part?" Olivia hesitated. "That people believe I might be connected to this lost family." Langley studied her for a moment before answering. "People believe many things." "And you?" The old scholar glanced toward the records. "I believe we are getting closer to the truth." The answer offered little comfort. Olivia lowered her gaze. "What if they are wrong? Then we will discover that as well." His voice remained gentle. "History does not fear the truth, Olivia. Only uncertainty." Later that evening, a formal message arrived from the palace. A special historical review session had been authorized by the crown. Selected nobles, scholars, and government officials would attend. The purpose was simple: present the findings publicly and determine whether further investigation was warranted. The announcement sent a wave of excitement through the capital. Olivia felt only dread. 2 days later, she entered the royal council hall for the first time. The chamber was enormous. Sunlight streamed through towering windows. Rows of nobles filled the seats. Scholars occupied tables near the front. The atmosphere felt heavy with expectation. Olivia stood near Professor Langley while conversations echoed throughout the room. Some people watched her with curiosity, others with open doubt. She felt very small beneath so many eyes. Then the doors at the far end of the hall opened. Silence gradually spread through the chamber. Alpha King Ethan Blackwell entered accompanied by senior advisors. He moved toward the central platform and took his place. His presence immediately settled the room. Ethan's gaze briefly found Olivia across the hall. The look lasted only a moment, but it carried reassurance. He was not judging her. He was searching for answers just as she was. Professor Langley began presenting the evidence. One document followed another. The forgotten crest, the altered records, the hidden references to House Ashbourne. Murmurs spread through the audience as each discovery was revealed. Some nobles appeared fascinated. Others seemed uncomfortable. Then a council member rose from his seat. "With respect," he said, "none of this proves that the young woman is connected to these records." Several people nodded. The challenge was reasonable. Langley acknowledged it immediately. "You are correct." He placed another folder onto the table. "Which is why we continued searching." The room became still. Slowly, the historian opened the newly recovered file. Inside rested several pages discovered only the previous evening. Pages containing names, dates, family connections, and according to the first line visible to everyone in the chamber, the final record had been created specifically to identify the missing child if she was ever found. Olivia felt her heartbeat quicken as Langley prepared to read the contents aloud. The council chamber was so quiet that the turning of a single page seemed loud. Every eye remained fixed on Professor Langley as he carefully unfolded the newly recovered document. Olivia stood motionless near the front of the room. Her hands felt cold despite the sunlight pouring through the tall windows. Across the chamber, nobles leaned forward in anticipation. Some looked skeptical. Others appeared fascinated. Alpha King Ethan Blackwell watched silently from his seat, his attention focused entirely on the evidence before them. Langley adjusted his glasses and began reading. The document had been written more than 20 years earlier by a royal official assigned to oversee the protection of a child whose existence had been concealed from the public. Several sections were damaged by age, but the surviving passages were remarkably clear. One by one, the details emerged. The child belonged to House Ashbourne. The child had been removed from public records for her safety. The child had been placed under guardianship and raised far from the capital. Murmurs spread through the audience. Olivia felt her pulse quicken with every sentence. The story sounded impossible, yet something deep inside her recognized fragments of it. Memories she could never fully explain. Questions that had followed her throughout her life. Then Langley reached the final page. The room fell silent again. "This section identifies the guardians assigned to protect the child," he said. His voice remained steady, though emotion lingered beneath the words. He continued reading names, locations, and dates. Each detail matched information Olivia had provided about her childhood. Several council members exchanged uneasy looks. The pattern had become impossible to ignore. Finally, Langley lowered the page and took a slow breath. The record concludes with a description intended to confirm the child's identity if she was ever found. Nobody moved. Female, blonde hair, blue eyes, born during the final year recorded for House Ashbourne. Olivia felt her heart pounding. The historian looked directly toward her. The child was entrusted with a silver pendant bearing the Ashbourne crest. Gasps echoed throughout the chamber. Olivia instinctively touched the necklace resting against her collar. Suddenly, every eye in the room seemed fixed upon it. Langley carefully placed the document on the table. Based on the combined evidence, there is only one reasonable conclusion. Complete silence followed. Even the distant sounds of the city seemed to disappear. Olivia Carter is the missing daughter of House Ashbourne. For several seconds, nobody spoke. The words hung in the air like a forgotten truth finally returning home. Olivia stared at the floor. She had imagined many possibilities during the investigation. None prepared her for this moment. Across the chamber, several nobles looked stunned. Others appeared embarrassed. A few had openly questioned her character only days earlier. Now the evidence stood before them. Ethan slowly rose from his seat. The movement immediately drew attention. He stepped forward until he stood beside Olivia. Not in front of her, not above her, beside her. The gesture did not go unnoticed. Ethan looked toward the gathered council. "The evidence has been presented." His voice carried calmly through the room. "If anyone wishes to challenge its authenticity, this is the time." No one spoke. Several scholars quietly nodded in agreement. The documentation had been examined repeatedly. The records supported one another. The conclusion was undeniable. Ethan glanced toward Olivia. For the first time since the investigation began, she saw certainty rather than questions in his eyes. Yet the greatest surprise came moments later when Langley revealed one final detail hidden within the recovered files. According to the oldest surviving records, House Ashbourne had not simply been an important noble family. It had been the kingdom's original royal bloodline. And by right of birth, the young woman standing in the center of the chamber was not merely a forgotten heir. She was the rightful princess the kingdom had lost more than 2 decades earlier. For several moments after the revelation, the council chamber remained completely silent. The truth seemed too enormous for anyone to process. Olivia Carter, the quiet archive assistant who had arrived in the capital carrying a worn travel bag and a silver pendant, had just been identified as the lost princess of the kingdom's original royal bloodline. The realization spread slowly through the room. Nobles exchanged stunned glances. Scholars reviewed their notes, as if hoping the words might somehow change. Yet the evidence remained exactly where it had always been, hidden beneath decades of forgotten records waiting to be found. Olivia stood motionless. She felt as though the ground beneath her had shifted. Throughout her life, she had wondered about her family. She had imagined countless possibilities. Never once had she imagined this. Memories of her grandmother filled her thoughts. The gentle stories, the unfinished conversations, the moments when questions had been met with sadness instead of answers. Suddenly everything made sense. Across the chamber, Ethan remained beside her. His presence provided a strange sense of stability amid the chaos unfolding around them. He understood that this moment belonged to Olivia, not to politics, titles, or history. For the first time, she was confronting the truth of who she had always been. Eventually, An elderly duchess slowly rose from her seat. Her name was Margaret Holloway, one of the most respected noble women in the kingdom. For years, she had defended the official version of history. Now she looked directly at Olivia with tears visible in her eyes. "Your Highness," she said quietly. The title echoed through the chamber. Several people looked startled hearing it spoken aloud for the first time. The Duchess lowered her head. "The kingdom failed you." No one interrupted. "We allowed your family to disappear from memory. We allowed the truth to be buried." Her voice trembled slightly. "For that, I am deeply sorry." The words seemed to break something inside the room. One by one, other nobles stood. Some offered apologies. Others simply bowed their heads, not because they feared a new princess, because they recognized a wrong that had lasted for decades. Olivia listened to each gesture in silence. When she finally spoke, her voice remained soft. "You cannot change the past." The room grew still. "Neither can I." She looked around the chamber. "But perhaps we can choose what happens next." The simplicity of the answer affected people more than any accusation could have. Ethan watched her carefully. Once again, she revealed the quality that had impressed him from the beginning. Not pride, not entitlement. Grace. The same grace she had shown before anyone knew who she truly was. As the session continued, Professor Langley presented recommendations for formally restoring House Ashbourne to the historical record. The proposal received overwhelming support. Documents would be corrected. Records would be updated. The truth would no longer remain hidden. By the end of the afternoon, the council reached a unanimous decision. Olivia would be officially recognized as Princess Olivia Ashbourne. Yet even as applause filled the chamber, another realization quietly emerged. The throne itself had never been the thing she wanted. What mattered was understanding where she came from, understanding why she had been hidden, understanding the family she had lost before she was old enough to remember them. As the gathering finally concluded, Ethan and Olivia walked together through a long palace corridor overlooking the city. Golden evening light streamed through the windows. Neither spoke for several moments. Then Ethan glanced toward her. "How are you feeling?" Olivia laughed softly despite everything. "I'm not sure there is a word for it." Ethan smiled. "That seems reasonable." They continued walking. Neither noticed Professor Langley watching from the far end of the corridor, holding a newly translated document. His expression carried both excitement and disbelief, because hidden within the final recovered records was one last revelation. According to the oldest surviving royal decree, the throne Olivia had just been connected to had never legally passed to another bloodline. By ancient law, it had been waiting for its rightful heir all along. The final revelation arrived 3 days later. By then, the capital was already transformed by the news of Olivia's identity. Scholars worked day and night correcting historical records. Newspapers published articles about House Ashbourne. Citizens gathered in public squares discussing the lost princess who had unknowingly returned to the city where her story began. Yet none of that compared to the document Professor Langley now carried through the palace corridors. He had reviewed it repeatedly. Each time, the conclusion remained the same. The ancient decree had never been revoked. The legal succession of the original royal bloodline had never officially ended. Late that afternoon, a special gathering was held inside the Grand Hall. Nobles, advisors, historians, and representatives from across the kingdom filled the chamber. Sunlight streamed through towering windows, casting golden patterns across the marble floor. Olivia stood near the front beside Ethan. Despite everything that had happened, she still felt more comfortable listening than standing at the center of attention. Professor Langley approached the platform carrying the final document. The hall gradually fell silent. "Over the past several weeks," he began, "we have recovered records that many believed were lost forever." He paused. "Today we present the final piece." The historian carefully unfolded the decree. The parchment was older than any document previously discovered. Several royal seals remained visible despite the passage of time. Langley explained its significance. Generations earlier, the decree had established the succession rights of House Ashbourne and the conditions under which those rights could be transferred. According to every surviving record, those conditions had never been fulfilled. The implications were extraordinary. Murmurs spread through the hall. Olivia listened quietly, still struggling to comprehend how deeply her life had become connected to the kingdom's history. When Langley finished speaking, Ethan rose from his seat. Instantly, the room became silent again. The king stepped forward and looked across the gathered audience. History has returned something precious to this kingdom, he said. His voice carried clearly throughout the hall. Not simply a name, not simply a title. He glanced toward Olivia. A person. The room remained still. Ethan continued. Long before any document was discovered, Olivia earned the respect of everyone who truly knew her. She showed kindness when recognition was absent. She showed integrity when no reward existed. She remained herself even when the world offered uncertainty instead of answers. Olivia felt emotion rise unexpectedly in her chest. Ethan's words were not about royal bloodlines. They were about character, about the woman she had always tried to be. The truth revealed her heritage, Ethan said, but it did not create her worth. Several people nodded. Many smiled. Some wiped away tears. The kingdom had gained a princess. Yet what moved them most was that she had already proven who she was before anyone knew the truth. As applause filled the hall, Olivia looked around the room. For years she had believed she was searching for a future. Now she realized she had also been searching for her past. Both journeys had led her here. Later that evening, after the celebration ended, she stood with Ethan on a palace balcony overlooking the city. Lights sparkled below them like stars scattered across the hills. Neither spoke for a while. The peaceful silence felt comfortable. Finally, Olivia looked toward the horizon. Everything changed so quickly. Ethan smiled. Perhaps. She glanced at him. You do not think so? He shook his head. The facts changed quickly. You did not. Olivia laughed softly. The answer felt exactly right. Below them, the kingdom continued celebrating. Above them, the first stars appeared in the night sky. Somewhere inside the royal archives, the restored records of House Ashbourne now occupied their rightful place on the shelves. The forgotten princess had returned. The truth had been restored. And as the lights of the capital stretched endlessly into the distance, Olivia finally understood something her grandmother had protected all those years. Destiny had never been about claiming a throne. It had been about finding her way home.